A very warm welcome to all our listeners around the world. You're welcome to the Tony Tukumbo Fernandez Show, a show that promotes the true life and success stories of African and Caribbean achievers around the world. So, if there's a product or initiative you wish to promote, feel free to give us a call on 0788 280 9005. That number once again is 0788 280 9005, and take time to visit our website at www.tonyfernandez.co.uk. It's all about promoting the true life and success stories of African and Caribbean achievers around the world. And we have some amazing guests lined up every single week for the rest of the year. And yeah, guess what, guys? It's Black History Month. So we also have some very special guests for Black History Month on the Tony Tukumba Fernandez Show. Also promoting Black history, not just in a month like this, but all day round. And talking about Black History Month, we also have a very prominent and profound gentleman today on our show who also has a passion for Black history. He is an award winning journalist. He's also a publisher, editor, and business management consultant with a doctorate in business management. And he has his fingers in so many pies. He's written so many publications, some of which have won the Obama Shield Award. So it's a pleasure to meet for the very first time virtually Dr. Christopher Johnson. It's a pleasure to be on the Tony Tukumbo Fernandez Show. How are you today, sir?
Not bad, sir. Thank you very much for being on your show. I didn't hear about your show before, but I read about it about 2 weeks ago, and I was quite impressed with the stewardship of leadership you're giving in the various communities. I think there is so much we have to do when it comes to African history, even though it is about minority ethnic businesses anyway. But yes, it's a particular time. I think it's very timely, your program, your show. And I do hope that people will see it as very informative and educational where you're concerned.
And it was a profound pleasure to receive your phone call out of the blue 2 weeks ago. It was more or less like a positive calling at the
Yeah,
right time at a time like this for many reasons. Like they
yeah,
say, things happen for a reason in life.
yeah, yes,
And
yeah.
I'm sure our listeners around the world are dying to know a bit about yourself, your background, and the things you're most passionate about in life.
Yes, thank you very much. I was born in the 1950s. That makes me a very ancient man, so to speak. I was born in the 1950s in a place called Guyana. It was called British Guiana because it was a colony, like most English-speaking countries. We have 53 Commonwealth countries. You had the African continent, the Indian subcontinent, and the English-speaking Caribbean region. Guyana happens to be the only English-speaking country in South America. Even though we speak several languages, Hindi, Creole, African Creole, Portuguese, Amerindian, Chinese, and other ethnic languages, if you like. So growing up in an evolving democracy, if you like, a combination of a political independent country. We gained independence in 1966, and we subsequently gained Republican status in 1970. Uh, Very interesting indeed. We were always part of the so-called African liberation struggle. I say so-called because that is what it was described as, but it was a real struggle, particularly with the frontline states of South Africa, the South African region, Angola, Mozambique, Botswana. And as a young journalist growing up in Guyana, I was part of that firmament or that movement towards the liberation of the continent. And of course, we were always involved in democracy using the pen rather than the sword. And so I grew up as someone who wanted to be a change agent, not a power broker, but a change agent. And so I decided to get involved in journalism and writing. In fact, my dad was very instrumental in that because I saw so many problems around us. And myself, my two brothers and sister, uh, and my parents, we lived in a very middle class environment, but we had also working class, if you like, aspirations, particularly for those who were struggling, etc. And we saw material poverty as not something that people were born with, but it was an artificial thing. It was a man-made uh, ideal. In fact, it was a construct, really, because no one was born poor. But I felt that by using journalism and professional writing, I can attempt to change, if you like, the paradigm situation in the country at the time. And after a number of years in the profession, I established a publishing house. And we had about 6 or 7 people as part of it. In fact, I was one of the youngest publishers at the time. And because of the work that we did, I was granted a fellowship to Wilson College, Cambridge. And when I came to this country many moons ago, I realized how advanced we were as a developing nation.
Mm.
I also had the opportunity to meet Africans there at Cambridge. I met Chinese, I met Indians, I met other people from the 53 Commonwealth states. And I was amazed at the level of knowledge and experience that we already had from our so-called formative years. And I was, I realized that, I'm on a mission. In fact, I didn't even want to leave Guyana to take up the fellowship. And my dad said, no, you've done human service to your country. You go to greener pastures and continue the work you're doing. And so that was and as I said, the rest is history. I started working with a group of publishers entitled Handset Publications. This was someone who came from my country many years ago. He came in 1950s, and he established 3 newspaper titles, African Times, Caribbean Times, and Asian Times. Asian Times meaning both East Asians and South Asians, respectively. And so I had the privilege and the opportunity to work with those publications, all 3 publications, for many years. And then I realized that I had something more to offer. And while studying, I decided that I wanted to write business books because I realized that the minority ethnic enterprise dividend was not included in economic policy. I was able to read the Lord Scarman's report, in which he recommended so many interesting economic and social programs or initiatives for African and Caribbean people due to the civil disturbances we had in the 1980s. In fact, we've had disturbances way back in the 1950s, in the Nottingham riots, etc., etc. And so I began that journey, and in 2008, I published the first business book of its kind, British Caribbean Enterprises, A Century of Challenges and Opportunities. And that book looked at Caribbean businesses starting from 1907, when Trinidadian-born Dr. John Alcindor, who was a surgeon who came all the way from Scotland, he's of course Trinidadian-born. He left Scotland to come to the West London to set up the first surgery, which was part of the health and social care sector at the time. And so he became a pioneer. And he was also involved with people like Harold Moody, Ronald Moody of Jamaica, and other Caribbean people as well. And in those days, you had the African Liberation Movement. Lots of West Africans met in Manchester, London, Birmingham, particularly Ghanaians, Sierra Leoneans, and Nigerians. And they worked with Caribbeans and South Asian people in terms of the civil rights movement here, which were, we were mimicking what was taking place in the United States at the time. But we always had writers, as you know, we always had literary people. Men and women were writing Some wrote on the ground, some wrote towards the established order, etc., etc. So we always had a culture of writing. The problem is that we have never been acknowledged and recognized fully for our contribution to economic development in this country. And that is where I saw the opportunity, but I also saw the need to create a more social, cultural justness approach to enterprise development. And so in 2018, I authored the second business book entitled The Anatomy of British South Asian Enterprise. And this is where a Bengali-born Sheikh, Dean Muhammad, established the first Indian stroke South Asian business in 1806, 1807. And interestingly, while we were publishing these two books, the British Caribbean Enterprise book and the South Asian book, we came across a lot of Africans across the ethnic divide. We came across traditional Africans, Indian, South Asian Africans, most of them who came from East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. And we also came across a lot of European Africans, and most of them, of course, are in South Africa, the South African regional peninsula. And then we came across mixed heritage Africans too, plus Africans who were born and bred in this country because of their parents and relatives, etc. And very quickly we realized that something needed to be done. And so in 2018, from an informal series of conversations we had with Africans across the UK, we began piecing together tons and tons of information. And what was very fascinating about this historic development is that Africans in Europe were responding much quicker and much more stylishly, I might add, and more efficiently to a book on African entrepreneurship in this country. And the British Africans were a bit, I wouldn't say they were stillborn, but they were still evolving. And so in 2019, I went to Guyana to see my dad and my brothers and my sister. And I had a discussion with my dad, who I still consider to be my mentor. And he said, you need to work on this book full time, son. And I said, well, Dad, my day job is that of a business management consultant. And he said, well, you have to complete this book because the timing couldn't be more propitious. And so when I came back in 2000, having spent 6 weeks, of course, by then the country was on the first lockdown. And we had these series of programs we were doing on Zoom, business support, etc., because that is some of the things that we do. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that we have to go flat out and, do field research. Don't sit behind a desk and pump out information and data, but speak to the real people. As they say, touch the flesh, as it were. And so to date, we have been able to capture several African businesses in the West Midlands, East Midlands. In fact, we went to Nottingham, the birth of the first African business that was established in 1793 by George Scipio Africanus of Sierra Leonean heritage. He and his wife Ruth established what was called, it was an employment agency, the Africanus Register of Servants, really. It was an employment agency for Africans as well as other minorities, etc. And he gave way to other Africans who established businesses from that period until the present time. In terms of our research to date, we have visited Scotland. In fact, we are due to go there in Enterprise Week. We are organizing an Enterprise Week celebration also in the West Midlands for people of African and other descents. And we're also invited to go to Wales very shortly and Northern Ireland. So it's a wonderful journey to have intellectually, spiritually, and culturally. And I think there is no other time than the present time to pursue this kind of work.
And we're today here to celebrate that journey with you. What better time than Black History Month? We'll also come to something we spoke about 2 weeks ago, which is a publication which is in the unfolding very soon. But before we speak about that, what does Black History Month mean to you?
I find the term Black history as somewhat, I think it distorts the meaning. I think it is pejorative because the word Black refers to pigmentation, it refers to all kinds of things. It can be seen as political, it can be seen as a confrontational slogan as well. It could also be regarded as a cultural, iconic form of affirmation. And I think what we need to describe this particular month and other months to come is African History Month, because it came about as a result of Negro Improvement Month in the United States. And it used to be celebrated sometime in January, February, and then it became a Martin Luther King's holiday as well. So I think the Sierra Leonean who who borrowed the term Black History Month in 1987 has a lot to account for, really, because I don't think he understood at the time. And you know, there are certain opportune moments in which certain types of language or words or phraseology can be deployed or employed. But I think as we progress as a people, and we have progressed over many, many years. I mean, we've been in Europe for over 1,000 years. Even though mainstream claim that Africans and Indians have been here for over 400 years. Well, they probably mean over 1,000 years. But we've been here for a very long time. And so we must not be afraid to define ourselves by our ethnicity and heritage. I mean, I came from a very polyethnic family, but I know, I don't have a problem with my identity at all, but I would not allow anyone to describe me by my color, because that's not my heritage, that's my pigmentation. And my pigmentation has nothing to do with my character, in the first place. So I think we have to be very mindful how we label each other, how we stereotype each other. It's easy to mimic Eurocentric notions of self and Eurocentric notions of identity. But we have to be more clever, we have to be more craftier, we have to be more intelligent in the use of language, in the use of phraseologies, and describe ourselves in the spirit that the Creator gave us. And so African people must be proud to say, yes, I'm African, so what? And
Now,
let other decide, on other pejorative or other terms that could be very demeaning. Yes.
so now, with your knowledge and with your expertise in the world of journalism and history, how important and how effective is it for us to be in control of our own narratives?
I'm so glad you said in control of our narratives. I would say managing our narratives, because we have no control in the divine scheme of things. But I know you're using control in a very relative sense. So I could understand your slippery use of the language. Interestingly, we have, I've always said to people, even before I came to this part of the world, I said, we are free thinkers. We have already been liberated. I mean, when Robert Nesta Marley, God rest his soul, spoke about, emancipation yourself from mental slavery, that's a powerful statement he made. And I think a lot of us are not aware of the influence and the power that we exude, not just possess it, but we exude it, we demonstrate it. And so sometimes that influence and power as attributes of our character are both feared and respected. But I prefer those attributes to be respected rather than be feared. Because if we are faithful of the power and the influence we have, we might as well be faithful of the master who gave us that in the first place. So we have the influence and the power, and we can exercise what I would call individual initiatives. This show that you're doing came from your freedom of thought, first of all, your freedom of thought. It was a concept. Whether it was a concept that was desirable or not, you saw it as a missionary one. And so you're pursuing it with a missionary zeal. And so each of us has the opportunity in this country here and other parts of the world to do this kind of work. And as I said, we don't have to be negatively confrontational. We can do it in a very positive, affirmative way. And as you said in one of your programs, I'm merely quoting you out of context here, and that is to let ideas contend, because ideas cannot contend in a vacuum. They have to contend in a space where you have dialogue and discussion. So I think we are at a very propitious time in history. Some people will say we are at the threshold of history. I say we are at a propitious time where we can activate or reactivate some of the endeavors that our ancestors could not continue, because most of them or some of them became martyrs of the cause, and we know who they are. And so we must not enjoy the road of martyrdom. We must enjoy the road of success. And that is what we hope to do. What I'm particularly interested in is for us to leave a marker on the contribution of migrant entrepreneurs to Britain's economic history, because that marker does not exist anywhere. There is no Commonwealth history, for example, that includes that. Britain's economic history is bereft of the history of immigrants and their contribution. You know, we are seen as spoiled votes. Sometimes we're seen as irrelevant, or we're seen as an add-on, we're seen as a sub, you know, and we need to demonstrate that we have the wherewithal, we have the capability and the capacity initiative to make that contribution.
Now, in demonstrating that capability, we do have I believe you're working on a publication at the moment, which is going to be out sometime in the future. And I'm sure our listeners are dying to know a bit about that from a history perspective.
They should not die, they should be alive and kicking. They should not die, but in a manner of speaking, yes, it's the working title, I must say, because I have to exercise judicious restraint in the publishing arena. I've been in the business for over 40 years. So as you know, when you're in the media, when you're a media figure, you have to be very mindful of certain legal ramifications and implications. And so the working title is British African Entrepreneurship. And we are looking at the contribution of British Africans to Britain's economic history since the 18th century, the latter part of the 18th century. And so the book will encompass a brief history of the continent, obviously, in terms of its dynasties, you know, its royal governances. It will look at young people who have been contributing to economic development of African descent. It would take a cross-cultural and a cross-ethnic dimension of British African history, because on February 26, 1885, you know, the continent was partitioned or carved up by 13 European nations who met at a conference in Berlin, Germany, and decided that let's carve the whole thing up. Not in their words, but that is the impression that was conveyed. And so you now have North, South, East, West, and Central African regional states. And that carving up or that partition was taking place, you know, prior to Afrikaners setting up the first employment development agency of any kind in this country. that was, a prelude to that. And so when Afrikaners set that up, years later, the continent was divided. So those are some of the underlining historical factors that we will include in the book, because the partition is as a result of so many issues we have on the continent, and even people here who are divided. East Africans don't understand South Africans. North Africans don't understand Central Africans. And, you've heard of the Biafra War. We saw the apartheid regime in South Africa. We see what's going on in North African Peninsula with Egypt and Libya. And so the continent's, or part of the continent's instability has a lot to do with historical causative factors, one of which was the carving up, the colonization, and to some extent the rampant exploitation of the continent's resources. And these are not historical untruths. These are not propaganda being peddled. It's a fact. It's a historical fact. And in Britain, we are very good at suffering from what I would call historic amnesia. We forget things very easily when it suits us. So that kind of history will be contextualized. We would also be looking at the presence of Africans in this country. We had Indians leaving their country in the 17th and 18th century from the Punjab region and the Gujarat state in India, going to East Africa to build the railways. And that was under the British colonial system. They didn't go on their own volition. So when, Africans said, look what these South Asians are doing here, it is part of the migration trend. It is part of an arrangement or a set of arrangement between the East India Company and the African Company. All of these were colonial merchant companies that were established as trading posts between Africa, India, and even the West India Company we had as well. That's in the Caribbean region. So all of these historical concurrents need to be published and not to be hid under the rubric of, it was colonialism, so what? As writers, we are obligated to the truth. As professionals to the bone, we should have a sense of integrity. And we must be open in our perspectives. We don't have to use confrontational language, but we can present the facts and the figures and allow people to judge for themselves. The other aspects of the book would include the organization performance of African businesses. And here we're going to be using something called the Standard Industrial Classification Model, or the SIC model, that first came to this country in the 1950s. And this is a model that is used by the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO. It is a classification that is well known to mainstream. It is not very much known to minority ethnic businesses at all, because we are not in that structural kind of framework. Most of our businesses are income replacement businesses. Some of them are based on convenience. Some are based on seeking or eking out a living or trying to maintain self-reliance or self-independence. So that would be very fascinating, looking at business and professional services, construction, manufacturing, health and social care, and some of the sectors and business segments that don't figure in the Office for National Statistics data. And of course, we'll be looking at women as well in business. They'll be part of that. We'll be looking at the challenges and opportunities of and for African businesses in the 21st century. And then, of course, we'll be looking at the future of African businesses. And that will take in Africans in Europe, Africans in India, Africans in China, North America, Canada, and the United States, as well as the Americas, because Africans are all over the country, all over the world. And so we want to encompass them in this particular publication. One of the things that we would also do, if I may add here, is to look at the mainstream support agencies whose remit is to provide technical assistance and enterprise support to minority ethnic firms. Because one of the things that we should not exclude are mainstream institutions that are providing us support. Because we do that all the time when we write our publications, we exclude them. And then we talk about exclusion ourselves, you know. So that is something, if you read the books that I've written, and you know, you will have copies of them pretty soon, you will see how we've mentioned mainstream, because we don't want to exclude, you know, these institutions that are there to support businesses, etc.
And you know, I wish we could really go on and on and on, but we've come to the end of the show. We must bring you back again. But
Okay.
before you go away, I'm sure our listeners will want to know if they want to get in touch with you to know more about your work and your initiatives and your publications. Are there any social media platforms out there, or how do they get in touch with you?
Yes, they are, and I think you were able to source them quite well too. The platform that you can look at, well, there are two of them, but the one here is www.geds.center, center spelled in the American version, www.geds, G-E-D-S, all lowercase, .center. And then there's another website, it's www.ceal, CEAL, it stands for Community Education Academy of Leadership, ceal.org, org.uk.
Dr. Johnson, we're proud of the amazing initiatives you're doing in our community. We are going to continue this dialogue offline and online. And God bless you and keep shining all the way. And it's beautiful to have you today.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you.